She treated a customer with kindness and got fired for it. But the next day she walked back in as the boss. Megan wasn't looking for trouble. She never had been. She wasn't the type to make waves or pick fights. She believed in showing up, doing her job, and treating people with kindness. That was how she was raised. Simple principles. Work hard, respect others, and keep your head down when things got messy. But sometimes doing the right thing had consequences. And she was about to learn that the hard way. For nearly 3 years, Lancaster Grill had been her second home. It wasn't anything fancy, just a local diner on the east side of Columbus, Ohio, sandwiched between a gas station and a laundromat. The kind of place where truckers stopped for coffee, families came for Sunday breakfast, and the waitstaff knew your order before they even learned your name. It was an easy job to take for granted. The hours were long, the pay wasn't great, and the management barely cared. But Megan stuck with it. She had bills to pay. Her rent was already too high for a one-bedroom, and her younger brother, Evan, was in his second year of college. He didn't know she helped cover his textbooks and groceries when their mom couldn't. She never told him, just sent a little extra when she could. That was why she took double shifts. Why she put up with customers who barely looked her in the eye. Why she ignored coworkers who treated kindness like a weakness. She had seen things that made her stomach turn. The way Beth, a senior waitress, ignored certain customers like they didn't exist while she laughed and flirted with others. How Jason, a newer server, avoided specific tables altogether. How the whole energy of the restaurant shifted depending on who walked through the doors. It wasn't just about money. A well-dressed businessman got smiles and conversation. A working-class customer in a paint-stained uniform got rushed service. And if someone looked like they might not tip, some of the staff wouldn't even bother trying. Megan hated it. But calling it out wasn't an option. She had learned that the hard way. A few months back, she'd made a passing comment about how a table had been waiting too long while Beth lounged by the counter, scrolling through her phone. Beth had barely looked up before shooting her a cold glare. "You don't get paid extra for being a saint, Megan." That was how it was. Either you went along with it or you learned to keep your mouth shut. Megan had chosen the latter, until that night. And after that night, nothing would ever be the same. The dinner rush had come and gone. It was a slow Wednesday evening, the kind Megan didn't mind. Fewer customers meant fewer complaints, fewer spills, and fewer forced smiles from coworkers who only turned on the charm when it suited them. She was at the counter, refilling the sugar dispensers, when the bell above the door jingled. An older black man stepped inside. His clothes were clean but slightly worn, nothing flashy, just a simple button-up and slacks. He carried himself with quiet confidence, but there was a pause in his step, a momentary hesitation as he scanned the room before walking forward. Megan recognized that hesitation. She had seen it before, especially in customers who already knew what kind of welcome they were or weren't about to receive. And sure enough, the response was immediate. Beth, leaning against the counter, didn't even look up from her phone. Jason, who had been laughing with another server near the drink station, glanced toward the door, made brief eye contact with the man, then turned back to his conversation as if he hadn't seen anything at all. No greeting. No welcome to Lancaster Grill. Just silence. Megan felt the weight of it, thick and uncomfortable. This wasn't an accident. Her coworkers had made a choice. For a second she considered keeping her head down, staying out of it. Would be easier. It always was. But then she looked at the man again. The way he stood there waiting. Like he was giving them a chance to prove him wrong, just this once. So Megan made a choice too. She wiped her hands on a napkin, grabbed a menu and walked straight over. "Evening, sir," she said, her voice warm but casual. "Just you tonight?" The man met her eyes and for a split second, something in his expression softened. "Yes, ma'am." His voice was steady. Megan smiled and gestured toward a booth near the window. "Follow me." "You okay with a booth?" "Perfectly fine." As he settled in, she handed him a menu and pulled a pen from behind her ear. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" "Coffee," he said. "Black." "Coming right up." Megan moved quickly, grabbing a fresh pot and pouring his cup herself. She could feel Beth's eyes on her, feel Jason watching too. But she didn't turn around. As she set the coffee down in front of him, he glanced around the restaurant, then back at her. "You the only one working tonight?" His voice was low, just for her to hear. Megan knew what he meant. She flicked her gaze toward the others, Beth whispering something to Jason, both of them barely trying to hide their smirks. "Feels like it sometimes." That made him chuckle. He flipped open the menu, scanning the options. "What's good here?" Megan tilted her head, considering. "Depends on what you're in the mood for. If you want something solid, the pot roast is made fresh. But if you want my personal favorite. She smiled. The grilled salmon's the way to go. He raised an eyebrow. That's so. She nodded. Promise you won't regret it. He smiled, small but genuine. Salmon it is. Megan jotted it down. Great choice. As she turned toward the kitchen, she heard it, Beth's muttered words just loud enough to carry. She's wasting her time. Megan clenched her jaw but kept walking. By the time she placed the order and returned with a fresh coffee refill, she could feel it, the shift in the air. It was subtle but unmistakable. The way Beth's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something sharp in her gaze. The way Jason kept glancing toward the booth, watching Megan like he was waiting for her to slip up to say something she shouldn't. Even Tom, the manager, had peeked out from his office, scanning the room before retreating without a word. A sinking feeling settled in Megan's stomach. She had just put a target on her back. But she wouldn't realize how bad it was, until the next morning. Megan had barely slept. Something about the way Beth muttered under her breath, the smirk that played on Jason's face, the way Tom had peeked from his office like he was already making a decision, it gnawed at her. But she told herself she was overthinking it. She had done nothing wrong. If anything, she had done exactly what a waitress was supposed to do, serve customers. So why did her stomach twist as she pulled into the Lancaster Grill parking lot? The morning air was crisp, the sun barely peeking over the buildings as she grabbed her apron from the passenger seat and slung it over her shoulder. A few cars were already in the lot, including Tom's. Megan stepped inside, expecting the usual morning routine. Beth and Jason standing around chatting, the kitchen crew prepping for the breakfast shift, the radio humming low in the background. But the moment she walked in, she knew something was off. Beth wasn't leaning against the counter like she always did. Jason wasn't by the coffee station cracking jokes with the line cooks. Instead, they were both watching her. Beth's lips curled into a sly little smile. Jason stood with his arms crossed, unreadable. And neither of them said a word. Megan's grip tightened around her apron. Then a door creaked open. Tom. He stood in the doorway of his office, his expression unreadable, but his posture told her everything. Like he had been waiting for her. Megan, he said flatly. Come with me. A cold pit settled in her stomach. No. Tom didn't answer. Didn't even look at her. He just turned and walked back into his office. Megan swallowed hard. She could still feel Beth and Jason watching as she made her way to the back. She took a breath, squared her shoulders and stepped inside. The office was small, cramped. The desk was cluttered with paperwork, coffee stains and an open file, her file. But Tom wasn't looking at it. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, exhaled slowly, and said the word she never saw coming. We're letting you go. It hit like a slap. Megan blinked, her mind scrambling to make sense of what she had just heard. What? Tom's expression didn't change. It's not working out. Her heart pounded. Not working out? She let out a sharp laugh, one with no humor. I've been here almost 3 years. I've never missed a shift. Never been late. Tom exhaled through his nose, bored like he was already tired of the conversation. It's a decision we've made. Megan knew what that meant. Her throat tightened. This is because of last night, isn't it? Tom didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence was enough. Heat flushed through Megan's face. So I get fired for doing my job? Tom's fingers tapped idly against the desk. You can collect your final paycheck next week. That was it. No warning. No explanation. Just out. Megan clenched her fists, but she knew there was no point in arguing. They had already made their choice. Now she had to make hers. Megan untied her apron, fingers trembling, and set it on the chair. She turned toward the door, ready to leave, but something in her gut wouldn't let her walk out just yet. She hesitated. Then, forcing herself to look back at Tom, she met his gaze head-on. You know this isn't right. Her voice was steady, firm. Tom didn't flinch. Didn't even try to argue. Megan shook her head, disgust curling in her chest, and walked out. Beth was still standing near the counter when Megan stepped back into the dining area, arms crossed, that same smug little smirk on her lips. Jason, pretending to wipe down a table, wasn't even hiding the satisfaction in his eyes. They had been waiting for this moment. Megan could feel it, the weight of their petty victory. Her face burned. Not from embarrassment, from anger. She wanted to say something. Call them out. Make a scene. Demand to know how they could be so damn heartless. But she didn't. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Instead, she lifted her chin, walked past them without a word, and pushed through the doors into the cold morning air. For the first time in 3 years she had no job, no paycheck, no backup plan. She got into her car, slammed the door shut, and gripped the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned white. Her breath came in short, sharp bursts. How was she going to pay rent? How was she going to help Evan with his groceries? How was she? Her phone buzzed. Megan ignored it at first, staring blankly at the windshield, her thoughts spiraling. Then she glanced at the screen. Unknown number. She hesitated. Then with a shaking hand she answered. Hello. A deep voice came through the line, steady, familiar. Megan, this is Richard Lawson. Megan frowned. I'm sorry, who? The man you served last night at Lancaster Grill. Her breath caught. She sat up a little straighter. Oh, yes, sir. How can I help you? There was a pause. Then Richard said something that made her stomach twist. I heard what happened. Of course he had. News traveled fast in places like Lancaster Grill. Megan let out a bitter laugh. Yeah, well, guess I should have just ignored you like everyone else. Richard's next words made her freeze. That's exactly why I'm calling. Because this wasn't the end of Megan's story. It was just the beginning. Megan's grip on the phone tightened. She had no idea why Richard Lawson, just another customer or so she thought, was calling her the morning after she got fired. Her heart pounded as she sat up straighter in the driver's seat. I'm sorry, what do you mean? There was a pause on the other end. Then Richard's voice came through, steady and deliberate. I wasn't just there for dinner last night, Megan. Her brows knitted together. I was there to see how my employees treat people. Megan blinked. Your employees? I own Lancaster Grill, Richard said simply. For a moment, the words didn't even register. She sat frozen, breath caught somewhere between disbelief and shock. I'm sorry, what? She finally managed. You heard me. Megan pressed her fingers to her temple, trying to wrap her head around what she was hearing. So, you own this place? Yes. And last night I was checking in. Richard's tone was calm, matter-of-fact. I make it a habit to visit my restaurants unannounced. No formal inspections. No warning. I come in as just another customer. That's how you learn the truth about how a business is being run. Megan's chest felt tight. And what did you learn? She asked. Richard sighed. That I have a serious problem with my staff. Megan let out a humorless laugh. Yeah. No kidding. There was another pause. Then Richard asked, how long have you worked there? Almost 3 years. 3 years, Richard repeated like he was filing that away. Megan's voice grew sharper. And I've never missed a shift. Never been late. I keep my head down, do my job, and treat people like human beings. But apparently that was enough to get me fired. Richard's response sent a jolt through her. That's exactly why I'm calling. Megan furrowed her brows. I don't understand. Richard was quiet for a moment before he spoke again. I let them fire you on purpose. Megan's stomach dropped. You what? I needed to see what they would do, Richard explained. I wanted to know if this was just about bad service, or if it was something deeper. And now I have my answer. Megan shook her head, anger bubbling up. So, you let them throw me out just to prove a point? I know it wasn't fair, Richard admitted. But now, I know exactly who I can't trust to run my business the way it should be run. Megan's pulse pounded in her ears. And what does that mean for me? There was a shift in Richard's tone, firm, almost authoritative. It means I need someone I can trust, he said. Someone who actually understands what it means to run a restaurant fairly. Someone who doesn't pick and choose, who gets treated with dignity based on their own prejudices. Megan frowned. I still don't see what this has to do with me. Richard's next words stopped her cold. I want you to come back, he said. As the new manager. Megan's breath caught. Her brain scrambled to process what she had just heard. What? You heard me, Richard said. I fired your manager this morning. Tom's done. Megan's mouth fell open. Beth and Jason were going to lose their minds. Richard continued, I know this is sudden. But I'm not interested in anyone else taking over. You understand what matters in a workplace. You know how people should be treated. That's exactly what Lancaster Grill needs. Richard continued, I know this is sudden. But I'm not interested in anyone else taking over. You understand what matters in a workplace. You know how people should be treated. That's exactly what Lancaster Grill needs. Megan swallowed hard. I don't know if I can do this. Yes, you can, Richard said firmly. And you should. She stared out the windshield, her mind spinning. Less than 24 hours ago, she had been tossed aside like she didn't matter. And now Now she was being offered the very position of the man who fired her. She took a slow breath. "What do you say?" Richard asked. Megan hesitated. She could still hear Beth's mocking voice, Jason's smug silence, Tom's dismissive tone. They had counted her out, thought they had gotten rid of her for good. But now she had a chance to be the change they never saw coming. Megan lifted her chin, gripping the phone a little tighter. "I'm in. You're welcome to leave." Beth opened her mouth, closed it, then turned to Tom as if he could do something. But Tom wasn't in charge anymore. He had no power here. Jason let out a breath, shaking his head. "This is a joke," he muttered. Megan lifted a brow. "No, Jason," she said, her voice steady. "This is karma." Richard glanced at his watch. "Now, unless you're resigning, I suggest you get to work," he said. His tone was calm, but there was no mistaking the finality in his voice. Beth's face burned with anger, but she didn't say anything. Jason muttered something under his breath and turned away, grabbing a rag and aggressively wiping down a table like it had personally offended him. Tom, however, wasn't ready to accept defeat. His face was still red as he pointed a finger at Richard. "You'll regret this," he spat. "She doesn't know the first thing about running a restaurant." Richard smiled, completely unbothered. "And yet, she already knows more than you ever did." Megan crossed her arms, tilting her head. "You should probably go, Tom," she said. "I'd hate for you to get escorted out." Tom glared at her for a long moment before finally grabbing his things and storming toward the exit. The door slammed behind him, rattling the windows. Megan turned back to Beth and Jason. "I suggest you both figure out how to do your jobs properly," she said. "Because from now on, things are going to be different." Beth narrowed her eyes but said nothing. Jason clenched his jaw, still fuming. Richard clapped Megan on the shoulder. "I have full confidence in you," he said. "You'll be great." Megan exhaled, steadying herself. "Thank you," she said. Richard nodded, then glanced around the restaurant. "All right, people. Get moving. We have a business to run." Slowly, the tension in the room started to fade. The staff returned to their duties, though Beth and Jason still looked like they had swallowed lemons. Megan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of this moment. Less than 24 hours ago, she had been tossed aside like she didn't matter. But now she was the one in charge. And she was going to make damn sure that nobody ever felt the way she had. As she stepped behind the counter, she glanced toward the kitchen, where the busboy gave her a small, hopeful smile. She returned it. This wasn't just her victory. It was the beginning of something better. And she was just getting started. Richard glanced around, taking in the restaurant with a slow nod. There was a noticeable difference. The air felt lighter, the tension that used to hang in the corners was gone. Staff moved with purpose, and customers actually looked comfortable, engaged in conversation instead of sitting stiffly, waiting too long for service. He smiled. "I'd say you're right." Megan crossed her arms, tilting her head. "Took some work, but I think we're getting there." Richard gestured toward an empty booth near the window. "Mind if I sit?" "Go ahead," Megan said, sliding into the seat across from him. A waitress, one of the newer hires who had replaced the ones who quit, walked over with a confident smile. "Coffee, Mr. Lawson?" Richard chuckled. "You remembered." "Of course." She poured him a fresh cup without hesitation. "Megan runs a tight ship." He nodded approvingly as she walked away. "It's good to see employees who actually enjoy their jobs." "Yeah, well," Megan said, leaning back, "turns out when you treat people like human beings they respond better." Richard sipped his coffee. "So tell me what's next?" Megan blinked. "Next? You've already turned this place around. But I get the feeling you're not the type to just sit back and coast." She exhaled, tapping her fingers against the table. "Honestly, there's still work to do. We need better training for new hires, and I want to change how we handle promotions. People like Beth and Jason had power for too long just because they were around the longest. That needs to stop." Richard studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I like the way you think." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. Megan frowned, picking it up. It wasn't just his name, it had the names of 3 other restaurants listed beneath it. "I own more than just Lancaster Grill," Richard said. "And I need someone like you overseeing more than just one location." Megan's heart pounded. "Are you offering me a promotion?" Richard smiled. "I'm offering you an opportunity." Megan let out a slow breath. Less than a month ago, she had walked out of this place feeling defeated, humiliated, discarded. Now she was being asked to step into something even bigger than she had imagined. She glanced out the window, watching as a customer laughed with a server, something she rarely saw when she was just an employee. She had done this. She had made this place better. And maybe, just maybe, she could do even more. Megan turned back to Richard, her grip tightening on the business card. "I'm listening." Richard surveyed the restaurant, his sharp eyes catching the subtle but undeniable shift in energy. The tension that had once clung to this place like a thick fog was gone. The staff moved with confidence, their interactions smoother, their smiles genuine. Customers lingered, conversations flowing easily. He nodded, satisfied. "Told you you'd be fine." Megan leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You didn't exactly give me a choice." Richard chuckled. "No, I didn't." She exhaled, glancing around. "It's strange," she admitted. "For the longest time this was just a job, a paycheck. Now it feels like something more." Richard's expression softened. "Funny how life works, huh?" Megan thought back to that morning in her car, the crushing weight of defeat pressing down on her. She had thought she'd lost everything. But standing here now, she realized she had gained something far greater than a paycheck. She had respect. She had purpose. And most importantly, she had changed things for the better. Because doing the right thing wasn't always easy. Sometimes it cost you everything. But sometimes, it gave you more than you ever imagined. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Because integrity matters, and it starts with how we treat each other.